Will run is that I will introduce the panelists, and panelists will be seated there as I introduce them, if they can come up and take their seat here. Unfortunately, there have been a couple of changes which I like to share, which I would like to share with you. I had spoken to the Governor State Bank about 2 months ago, and he was quite keen to come, but he had said that he's going to Islamabad the day before, and he went there and he has been asked by the Prime Minister to stay back. So unfortunately, he cannot join us, but we have Samar Hassan from State Bank. I'll introduce him in just a moment. He'll be representing the State Bank. And Dr. Salman Shah, who was supposed to present the keynote address, because that was the position of Hisar Foundation as well on water financing and water economy of Pakistan, he is not coming. So what I'm going to do in my limited capacity is just to pose the argument that Hisar Foundation has postulated about water financing, and I would like the rest of the panel members to respond to that. So those are the changes in the program. I have also requested, I'm going to introduce the chair of the session, which I have requested Arif Usmani of the National Bank to do it. Arif Usmani became the president of the chief executive of National Bank for 3 years, and he joined about 6 months ago. And he started his career with Citibank in 1981 and has over about 35 years of experience in the banking sector, having worked almost all over the world, but mostly in Saudi Arabia, Singapore, Asia Pacific region, as well as in Eastern Europe as well. He has worked for Samabak as chief risk officer, and then he is considered an authority on risk management, and it is a privilege to have Mr. Arif Usmani to chair the session. Arif, please take a seat here. Our next panelist is Ricard Lydon with the World Bank. Dr. Lydon has a PhD in water resources engineering and has 25 years of professional experience, most of which he has been gained from infrastructure development projects in Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America, and Europe. And we are particularly pleased that he was appointed Senior Hydropower Specialist in the Global Water Practice of the World Bank, and we are very happy he is here because we wanted World Bank to share their experiences in a country where the banking sector is not as committed to water financing as in other countries. So Ricard, if you can join us on the stage. My next panelist is Aliuddin Ansari. He currently serves as CEO of X Petroleum and an investment advisor. Prior to this, Ali served as a former president of Anglo Corporation since May 2012. He has a background in finance and investment. He started his career as an investment manager at the Bank of America in London. And he has held various positions, and he sits on many boards. And Ali is someone who is considered one of the best minds in terms of strategic thinking, and not only we, but many other professionals turn to him when they need advice on strategic direction. So Ali, may I request you to join me on the stage. Now, another interesting panelist with a twist is Barbara Schreiner. Barbara took up the position of Executive Director of WIN in January 2019. She has over 20 years of experience in water and natural resource management in developing countries with focus on good governance and addressing poverty and inequality. She has been active on a number of boards, including as member of the board of International Water Management Institute for many years, working with their International Steering Committee of GWP, Deputy Chairperson of Isi Mangalasio Wetland Park World Heritage Site. I am particularly pleased she is here because her favorite topics are integrity and corruption. So, Barbara, I'm looking forward to that, and if you can come and take a... Samar, I don't have your background. I'll say from... No, wait. I know a bit about you. So the next person representing the governor is Samar Hassan, who's the Executive Director, Development Finance. I have known Samar for quite some time, and I don't think he ages. Every year I see him, he looks younger and younger. So, Samar Hassan. Last but not the least is our wonder man, Mr. Adnan Aslam. Adnan is a man of many talents. I'm not going to read it from here. But Adnan Aslam is someone who runs many businesses, including technology business, education. He's an innovator. He's gone into innovation in water. And in our circle or circles, when people say something needs to get done and get done on time, they say, go to Adnan Aslam. And often we turn to him. I particularly invited Adnan because Adnan on his own has gone into water sector. And one of the things we wanted to do that there is innovation happening in the water sector, and if there is financing available that can further stimulate the water economy in Pakistan. And so Adnan Aslam. And as a late entrant and somebody who's an investor and going into water, I would like Sayyid Javed to come and, oh, you can, no. You bring a chair, please. Javed, I invited him because he has some interesting ideas. So thank you, everyone. Now, the way this works is that, as I said, Salman Shah was going to present it. Unfortunately, he is not here, and I'm not the best replacement for him. But what we have done is I'll share 4 or 5 slides with you, which is our case why the central bank and the commercial banks should be looking at the water sector and increasing or stimulating the financing mechanism. And we've got a couple of innovators here. They can tell you what their experience has been and what they are struggling with. So can I have the first slide? Glisser, Miss Glisser, please come. This is a young lady. We've gone digital, so she is going to request you that you can pose your question through digital medium. So please explain.
If anybody has any questions during the session that you'd like to ask any of the panelists, then please post it using this link. It's the same link as before and as yesterday, so if you've already logged in, it should save you the hassle. The link is glsr.it/WC19. If anyone has any issues, I'm sat at the back, so I can help you out as well. Thank you.
So I think we've got all the mechanical things out of the way. And is my presentation ready, team? Okay. So next slide, please. So Hisar Foundation has a think tank, and in 2016, our think tank published recommendations for water policy for Pakistan. This is just as a context. Pakistan at that time did not have a have a water policy. So our think tank over a 6 to 8 month period worked on it, and we floated a water policy and we disseminated it and we went about. So that water policy was futuristic and said, here is what our water policy should like. We published that in a report along with an article by Salman Shah called The Great Betrayal. And at that time, we also requested Salman to actually quantify the size of the water economy, which had not been done. So being an economist, he put it down and he came back with a presentation and a paper on the actual size or the potential size of the water economy. So what I'm going to do, I borrowed from there to present the Hisar Foundation position on water economy, and then I'll open it up to the other panelists to respond to it. Next slide. Okay? Yeah. So there is a compelling case for water investment. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development in a 2016 report links water growth and finance and calls for financing investment in water security and sustainable growth. And I'm just throwing certain numbers at you to just give an idea of the scale of the potential. So the scale of global economic losses related to water insecurity is estimated to be $260 billion per year. Another 120 billion per year from urban property and flood damages, and another $94 billion per year of water insecurity to existing irrigators. These are just big numbers, putting some metrics to the size of the problem and potential where financing agencies can come in. Next. And as many of you would know that Pakistan is considered a water economy. 60% of the population directly engage in agriculture and livestock. 80% of our Pakistan exports based on these sectors. I'm not going to break down the details because many of you would know, but that's not the focus. The focus is on listening to other members. Next. So what are the water metrics of Pakistan? Currently, the annual agriculture GDP for 55 million acres of irrigated land is under 500 million for I think it's 55 million acres of water. This makes total agriculture GDP of around $50 billion per year. And this is partly Salman's research as well. We feel there's a potential to raise it substantially and build and expand the water value chain. The cost alone, the cost of replacing Indus Basin system alone is estimated to be $300 billion. And as you know that Indus Basin is one of the largest contiguous irrigation system in the world. And it's a lifeline to Pakistan economy, and it is in bad shape. So this is again all research and done, and that's estimated to be $300 billion. If Pakistan, through efficiency, could generate even $1 billion for every 1 MA of Indus water we add to the system, it could have an agriculture GDP of US $200 billion versus the current $50 billion. The multiplier impact on the rest of the off-farm urban economy is 4 to 5 times. Now, I'm sure that some may disagree with this. As a matter of fact, we have taken a more conservative numbers. Others have taken a more liberal number with it. But this is just laying out before you where the potential lies. And so, what is Hisar Foundation financing vision? Is to our financing, financing the vision would require innovative organizational and financing mechanism, and that's why we've asked you to be here. Water projects traditionally have been the highest economic rate of returns in Pakistan, especially the hydro projects. The trick would be to translate economic returns into sustainable financial flows to service the financial instruments. So it's not institutionalized. We have never looked at it as an industry. We never had a chance where systems and processes and legislation has been developed to support this. And this is where I think the potential lies. And this would require establishing and organizing infrastructure as corporate entities that are able to harness and monetize some of the economic benefits for the investors. Public-private partnership is one of the more popular things to do, so that could play in. And we could also attract the global markets to come and look at Pakistan for financial services. So that briefly is the case we would like to present. And with that, I would now request, we will start the session with Ricard, Mr. Ricard Lydon, if he would like to come and share his views with us.
So I'm not sure if I should respond to your questions or I should just present my presentation, which is slightly, I mean, just a brief kind of feedback. I think that if you look at the global perspective, what happened in the US, what happened in Europe, I mean, the building all these big water infrastructure, hydropower and water infrastructure was really done very often to spur the economy of the country. And so it was done not just to get the water services or the power services, it was actually done to directly get the economy running. And I mean, this was the case in the 1930s in the US, for example. So I mean, I can only agree very much with Salman Shah. Was the kind of conclusion that he came with, I think, like that. So what I will talk to a little bit, and I'm hoping to discuss this further if there's any questions afterwards, is really about looking into, I think that one of the biggest problems that you have here in Pakistan and for water and for power investment, and that is the availability of financing. We often talk about many other things, and the many water conferences tend to work mainly on environmental and social issues, but the actual reality, and these are very important matters, but the reality is that often what really stops this water infrastructure being built is that we don't have the finances. So if we can have the next slide, please. So I think the first, I have only a few slides on the global perspective. What I really want to say here is that when it comes to financing of large infrastructure for water and power, there is a perception that the private investors or the private industry will do this. And in reality, this is not what we see. Just looking at the last decade, only 27%. Now, I'm a hydropower guy. I'm the lead energy specialist based in Islamabad. So even if I have a background in water, so I will talk mainly on the hydropower side, but I think that could be quite similar for the rest of the water infrastructure. So on hydropower, only 27% of the actual building the last decade was done privately. That means that the majority was done by public entities or directly by the government. And this is, if we can take the next slide, or I have done, okay, I have this, I see that now. So, and I mean, if you look at basically all large hydropower projects in the world were financed by the government and not privately. They were financed directly from the government, and it was financed in a staged way. So, and this comes to the three gorges, I mean, which is the biggest in China, Guri, Itaipu, etc. And all of them were financed from public money. And the reason is quite obvious. I mean, the reason is, large infrastructure has very high capex. You need the money, which will accrue a lot of interest during construction if you put it all up from the beginning. Secondly, you have a lot of risk, large risk. Often these structures are related to geological risk. There is often delays, even cost overruns. So, and if you are private investors, I mean, these are the kind of warning, I'm sure you have in the panel here a number of people from the private sector. These are the kind of warnings. First of all, you need to put up all the money in the upfront, and you have to have a large risk that you will have delays. You don't really know when you're getting your money back. These are the things that they will, it's much better to just go for a solar investment. You build solar for 6 months and you will get the power in 6 months. This is the one the private investors want. They don't want to put anything in that takes 5 years to build and with an uncertainty. So the reasons are not that strange, and this is nothing new. And just looking at this picture, so this picture is from my home country in Sweden, very close to where I have my summer cottage in Sweden. This was built in 1932. And I mean, if you look almost everywhere in Europe and in the US, all these, they were built by government budget when money was needed. There was no upfront money. They started building it, and the annual budget basically gave the funding for this project. And the thing is, if you look at, you have all these companies, you have Hydro-Quebec, you have EDF, all of these companies today have been incorporated, they've been commercialized, and some of them have been privatized. But they all basically come from a public utility. And when these structures were built, they were done publicly. So, coming to Pakistan, if we can take the next chapter, oh, I have it, sorry. I'll forget about it. Okay, so, I mean, obviously, Pakistan doesn't have the luxury of having, especially in this fiscal situation, of just coming up with the funds for Daimler Basha and the rest of all of the major structures that we are talking about. So that's why commercial funding de facto has a very big role. And the best way for me to kind of show this is to talk about one case study for the Dasso hydropower project, which I am actually leading from the World Bank. And you have probably seen a lot about Dasso in the last days in the news. So Dasso was a typical case. So if you just look at the problems we have with Dasso, the cost is close to $5 billion. You need $600 million just to start the preparatory works, just to build the access roads, just to get power for construction to the site. Just for that, you need the $600 million. Now, the gestation is around 7-8 years for having this project being done. And more than half of the funding needs to be in foreign currency. Now, the utility that's building this, WAPTA, doesn't have any experience of raising money commercially. And also, on top of that, very large risk is done in Upper Kurdistan. There's political risk, there is geological risk, there's a whole set of risks involved in this project. So how do you actually do this project? Because, and even, I mean, 5 billion. I'm from the World Bank. We don't have 5 billion. I mean, even if we would go together with ADB and AIB, etc., we will still not be able to give $5 billion to Pakistan for a project like this. So the whole point is, how do you do this? This is very difficult. So the solution is that we have to go with a blended financing. So we have to look at it, first of all, just because it's public doesn't mean that we cannot get private financing. This is actually, to work together is actually a very good idea. So you can have it public, that means that you can slice it, and you can plan it in a way that you bring in money when you really want it, and some of this money can be coming from commercial money if you structure it in the right way. So the idea, what we did in here is to have a sequence financing. We used a mix of concessional money and commercial money and money from the annual budget of Pakistan. What is very, very important is that we put in IDA, and in this case, an IDA credit for the preparatory works. Because again, when the private financing comes in, what I look at is the risk. So the point is, we need to put in some money to de-risk the project. So in this case, 600 million IDA went straight directly in to give the confidence that this project is going forward. And secondly, using the type of guarantees. In this case, we use the IDA guarantee together with government guarantees. So this is the slide, which is probably a little bit detailed, but if you're a financial guy, this is the way you look at it. And I don't want to go too much into detail, but this is how we structured the DASU project. So as you see here, you have one part, which is the IDA credit, where we are so far been going in with $600 million to fund the preparatory work, to ensure that they give confidence that we are actually building, the project is going to happen. In addition to that, we raised, or the WAPTA raised 144 billion rupees on the local market. With the World Bank in place, with the government's guarantee, and this project going to happen, the banks were actually queuing to put up money for this project. And especially those Islamic banks who need the assets as a security. Now, in addition to that, because you need foreign money, we made an IDA guarantee where we would be able to raise so far $350 million from Credit Suisse. And we're going to do that another one, $400 million later. In addition, we're putting $300 million related to the contracts, which is an export credit. So looking at all this, in principle, the $4.6 billion can actually be done by leveraging government fund, and I'm counting IDA money as the government funds. So leveraging is more than 3.5 times. So DASU, even as a $5 billion project, is actually not impossible to do if you structure it very well as a blended finance. And this is the example. Now there is a stage 2 also, which is another $1.5 billion, which will hopefully we will be funding the same way. So next one, last one. And this is my side. So I think that now this is nothing revolutionary. This is not rocket science in any way, and it has been happening a few times. And I think that what we heard yesterday from WAPTA on how they look at how they can do, how they want to do Momand and Daimler Basha, a lot of these things have been adopted by WAPTA. And that's why also in this project, when the World Bank came in, we didn't just want to solve the financing problem for DASU, but we also wanted to actually have this idea, we want to build the capacity of WAPTA. So even if it's not needed, the Credit Suisse loan has some guarantee from WAPTA, just to make sure that they are exposed to this market. Because if they're not, because that will help them next time to raise the money by themselves without the World Bank's help. And just to go through the whole, I mean, which you all know if you're in the banking world, whole roadshow, you have to go out there and you have to visit all the financiers, the banks and the credit agencies and so on. Everything like that we forced WAPTA to do. And in that sense, they should be able to do this again, even without the World Bank's help. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ricard. My next speaker is Adnan Aslam, who is the CEO of Multinet, and we've asked him to talk about investment opportunities through innovation. So, Adnan.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. I am looking at this whole thing. I'm not quite sure where to start because I think there are large infrastructure projects that are being discussed over here. And I read the subject as being bespoke. For me, bespoke was suited to a particular need. And I'm looking at the consumer end. As an entrepreneur, I'll probably look at, or let's put it as small entrepreneurs, we would look at the last mile, as you would say in the Bespoke model, suited for the very last mile, for individual capacities and things like that. So when I look at the larger picture over here for a last mile solution for water, I truly believe that the science to bring that water to the last mile is available, and it has been there, the science and the technology, and of course the financing also is available for over 5 to 7 years. I think it's a distribution issue that we are looking at, and we as entrepreneurs would probably focus on the last mile as an opportunity for us to be able to do it. Pakistan as a whole, and I'm sure Simi is here somewhere. If she's not, she would have corrected me. But Zurba, you can correct me, about 130 million gallons, a million acre foot of water coming in through the 150. So this is where Simi and Zurba help me out all the time. And approximately 90 to 93% go into agriculture and farming, plus industry, plus community use. At the end of the day, we're talking about only 3 to 4 million acre foot of water for consumer drinking purposes, I would say, total. And then we put the whole thing on the other side for industry. We add industry to it, will be another 3 to 4 million acre foot. So this is where we see the opportunity as entrepreneurs, if you would may say, and we look at that as an opportunity where the arbitrage from a water which comes from the river, for instance, Karachi, for instance, let's take this example as Karachi, which is, we're looking at here, which the needs, they're saying officially the requirement for Karachi is 1,000 gallons per day. Karachi is probably getting at the moment 500 million gallons a day. Potentially we can go up to 600. The K4 project, which has been sitting there for the past 8 years in planning, will probably deliver the water at 12 passes or 5 passes at the man-mouth. So we look at these arbitrages. We see that the end user, the industry is buying water is anywhere between 60 paisas to as much as 1 rupee, depending on if they're using it from the tankers or the RO or groundwater swelling, whatever it is. Approximately 250 million gallons of water per day is being pulled out from the groundwater over here and being sold at anywhere between 70 to 90 paisas a gallon. And this is where we come in and say, oh my God, I can get either the river from the lake at about anywhere between 5 to 7 paisas, and I can potentially sell it for 70 to 80 paisas. So all I need is something in between. I come from the telecommunication infrastructure thing. We have, as a company, and this is nothing to do with this, I mean, please do not consider this just as an experience. We have laid approximately 14,000 kilometers of fiber nationwide, which we own. So putting in about 3,000 kilometers or 4,000 kilometers of water pipes in this city is no big deal for us. All we need, I think financing also makes sense. RFI is here, the banks are over here, they will know exactly what it takes. All we need is right-of-ways and concessions. The banks will support a situation like this. I see a concession, I mean, very few businesses, and my guru over here, Ali, who was my first set of advisors when I got into telecommunication, and then I see Zahid Majid over here, who's working on recycling, all of that. I see a huge arbitrage. Picking up something for 5 cents, 5 paisas or 8 paisas, and delivering it anywhere between 40 to 50 paisas is the cost of delivery. All we need, I would say, when I say we, the entrepreneurs will want to know is, do we get concessions and the right-of-ways? And this is very easy for the government to do. And I think what the government should be considering in a situation like this is, Acha bhai, water, I'm sorry for my coming into Urdu, the Water and Sewerage Board, they need to, as the KE was privatized a few years ago, they should give an opportunity over here, not the entire city, maybe try it out in a Gulshan or any of the west areas which are most starved right now, and give them an opportunity, because even, so one more statistics for Karachi is, approximately 50% of the users are non-billable because of the Kachi Abadis and the Kachi Abadis, unsettled, what do you call it for some of my European friends? Informal sector, which are not, so they don't have the water lines going there and they not get billing. But they are paying, they're surviving. It's not that you hear people dying in Karachi. They are getting water and they're paying a premium for it. So all of that should be experiment in both different cities, middle income and less income, and they should be given the concessions for maybe, 100,000 households or 50,000 households, and that experiment should happen, and it should be bid out, and let the best person win. And I think that we look at it in a totally different solution. We are all aware of, and we have experts over here on the panel who can talk about the larger footprint where 93% of the water is being used in the agricultural field. We are talking about dams, to build them or not to build them. The 27% financing that has come into hydropower is purely for reasons because solar, like you said, solar and wind the returns are 5 to 8 years. We are people here in the stage who have all invested in solar and wind, and I know a few. So I can understand that part. But I think when we talk about Bespoke is very simple. We are talking about the last mile, and I think my interest, if at all, would be to be able to look at the last mile where the science is available, the potential to recovery for making it bankable is available. I think it's the will of the government to be able to make those decisions and to be able to make it affordable for the citizens of Karachi. So I just leave that thought over there because I think there are many people over here who would like to talk about better things. Thank you.
Thank you, Adnan. Now, just to change bit of attack, I would like to request Barbara Schreiner. She is going to speak about integrity issues in the water sector and how does this may be related to water financing as well. So, Barbara.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon. I'm going to talk actually fairly specifically about corruption and the relationship between corruption and issues of financing infrastructure. And one of the questions that I want to start with is what do we mean by corruption? Because to assume that everybody has the same understanding of corruption would be a mistake. It's defined legally, it's defined differently in different countries, and there are different understandings. When is a gift a gift? When is a gift corrupt? The lines aren't always all that clear, but generally, it's described as an abuse of trusted power for personal gain. I quite like the idea that it's a deliberate distortion of the decision-making process. And so it has legal issues and it has ethical aspects to it. And there are three ways of looking at the more less legalistic, although still somewhat legal, framing of corruption. There's what's called malfeasance, which is when a public official deliberately does something illegal that is contrary to law or harmful to somebody. And that's where we normally think of corruption, that somebody takes a bribe and does something in relation to receiving that bribe, distorts the decision-making process through being bribed. But there's also something called misfeasance, where you do something that is legal, but is actually harmful to somebody. And then there's non-feasance, which I'm afraid as an ex-government official is all too common, which is where as a public official you don't do what you are obliged to do as a public official, and you cause harm by the non-doing, which is unfortunately very prevalent in government. And then just to say that corruption stretches from grand corruption at the most high political level down to what we call petty corruption, where people are paying bribes perhaps to the private sector vendors in order to get water connections or in order to get their bills shifted and changed. So the corruption runs right across the water value chain. And it runs right across the water value chain with very significant impact. And so if we look at where in the value chain in relation to infrastructure, we can see corruption and what happens. Right up front in the planning process, we find that corruption influences the plans that are made. Because there is bigger payback out of bigger and more expensive projects than out of simpler and cheaper projects. And so in a corrupt environment, you will get a planning process driven towards over-designed, expensive, often inappropriate solutions. You also get a bias in terms of who gets the water because of the corruption. Often you will see political corruption driving decisions towards this community is getting water, not this community, for political purposes. Then you move on to procurement. Corruption will often result in more expensive bids being accepted, or more poorly qualified companies, but able to pay the bribe, getting the bid, winning the bid. At the construction level, and this is not specific to the water sector, this applies across just about any infrastructure sector. In construction, you will see something that gets described as cost overruns, when the price of the project goes up and up and up, 30% more than was originally bid, 50% more, over 100% more in some cases. The alternative is that you get very poor delivery, that construction is bad, that poor quality construction results in substandard infrastructure coming out of it. What does that mean down the line? That means that your operation and maintenance costs go up, either because you have an over-designed system that then has higher operation and maintenance costs, or because it's actually been very poorly delivered and your operation and maintenance costs are higher and your refurbishment costs come in earlier in the system. So corruption is not just a once-off that happens, it carries on for years down the system. And it also has socio-economic impacts. So where it results in poor delivery of services, because the infrastructure is gone to the wrong place, it's inappropriate, it breaks down, whatever, it has impacts on health and well-being, and it has impacts on economic productivity. So corruption has an enormous impact right down the sector, both in terms of the finances, but also in terms of socio-economic impacts. And then I come to the question of, are we costing for corruption? You've heard a number of figures tossed around this morning, 300 billion for the Indus. There are various figures on the table. Are we unconsciously and unintentionally building the cost of corruption into those figures? The figure is given that to achieve SDG 6.1 and 6.2 will take about $114 billion a year between now and 2030. Just the dam part of Damabasha is around $3 billion USD, if I've got my figures correct. There's a 1.6 billion project approved by the Sindh government for Karachi for 1.6 billion. If you take the figures that the World Bank has put on the table, and unfortunately it's very difficult to give accurate figures around the extent of corruption because it happens in the shadows, behind closed doors. The World Bank estimates 20 to 40% of investment in the water sector is lost to corruption globally. If you take 20% of those figures that are up there, it's 22.8 billion annually on the SDGs. It's 600 million on simply the dam part of Damabasha. It's 320 million US dollars in terms of the Karachi program. That's not a little bit of money. That's a chunk of change. And my question is this built into those figures? If you look at how the SDGs, the costing of the SDGs was calculated, if it is based on historical figures, then actually the cost of corruption is built into that figure already, because the corruption's been there. So it's built into the figures. If it's not built into the figures, then you can assume that it's going to cost 20 to 40% more than those figures are that are on the table. I've heard a lot of discussions and read a lot of stuff about how we're going to finance the water sector, and there's a lot of stuff about blended finance and private sector finance, and there's very little discussion on how controlling corruption, difficult as it may be, how controlling corruption frees up money and reduces the cost of services in the water sector. And who actually bears the cost? Corruption has been shown to increase inequality, and it's very clearly shown that it impacts most severely on the poorest of the poor, whether it is through access to water and reliable water services in both urban and rural area, whether it's poor farmers struggling to get access to water, whether it's poor communities who pay up to 20, 30 times more for their water than richer communities do. So what can be done? And things can be done. Can we have a world in which there is no corruption? I doubt it. But can we have a world in which corruption is significantly reduced? Yes, if we put effort into it and focus on it, we can. Whether it is through detection, whether it's through responding, whether it's through preventing. And I just wanted to give you a couple of pointers in terms of some of the work that we do and some of the work that other people have done around actually trying to reduce corruption. In the Water Integrity Network, we work on 4 elements of what goes into reducing corruption. Transparency, and over the past day and a half, I've heard a great deal of reference to the need for transparency, whether that is around data, around budgets, around plans, around monitoring. But transparency requires that information is made available in a way that people can understand it and use it. It is not about dumping vast amounts of data in the public sphere. It's about actually making information available in the way that people can understand it. Accountability, whether it is holding people accountable in government for their transgressions or accountability to the public. So there's a lot of work being done around social accountability, which is how people hold government accountable, other than through elections that happen once every 5 years, but hold government accountable in water delivery. Participation, the genuine participation of people in planning, in decision-making, and in monitoring. Not tick box participation, yes, we held a stakeholder meeting, tick, we can move on from that, but genuine participation that listens and takes account of what people are saying. And that requires informed and responsible demands from stakeholders, and that is informed as well by the transparency in information. And then finally, there has to be work around anti-corruption specifically, whether it's in legislation, in anti-corruption institutions, in the procedures and the regulations around actually anti-corruption. One of the things that makes a difference, I say looking around me, one of the things that makes a difference in corruption is diversity in management structures. There's a lot of discussion in the corruption sector around whether women are inherently less corrupt than men, and the jury is out, unfortunately, on whether we are less corrupt than men. There seems to be some argument that women are not as risk-taking as men and therefore are less prone to corruption, but some evidence that once women get the same access to power as men, they're not much less corrupt than men, unfortunately. But what the research does show is that more diversity in decision-making structures results in less corruption. People are happier to be corrupt when they're in a homogenous group than in a diverse group. Introduce significant numbers of women into your decision-making structures and corruption will go down. And then I wanted to talk very briefly about an interesting process that's been run in the Ukraine. The Ukraine government decided that they needed to modernize and upgrade and improve their procurement processes and clean up their act somewhat. And they introduced something, exactly why, it's called ProZorro, I don't know, but it is called ProZorro. And it's an open contracting approach on an IT platform integrated across public procurement. This is not specific to the water sector. But what has also gone with it is something called DoZorro, which is a platform, an IT platform that unites 22 civil society organizations who are actively monitoring the procurement processes of government. They've used the platform to identify over 5,000 cases of suspicious activities, and nearly half of those cases have been resolved, including over 1,200 cases where tenders were changed as a result of the feedback. 22 criminal charges and 79 sanctions issued. So having a structured platform where civil society can actually engage with the procurement processes of government has enabled a significant shift in terms of corruption in those procurement systems. Also in the Ukraine, Parliament adopted a procurement monitoring law, which establishes database monitoring procedures and mandates the use of digital tools, including corruption risk indicators. And that's just an example of some of the stuff that can be done that shifts it. I'm a firm believer that actually more eyes watching results in better processes and reduced corruption. And the question is, how does one actually facilitate that properly? So on that positive note, thank you very much.
Thank you, Barbara. I would now like to introduce Syed Javed, we added him to the panel because he wanted to speak about solutions to water financing and solutions and innovations that you have. Syed Javed.
I was roped in as I walked I came up the steps. Thank you, Zuhair. So the organization that I represent today, we call it Every Water. And my involvement with the water sort of a problem started during the flood in 2010. And we looked around and we saw that there was lots and lots of water all around people, but we still had to, rely on charity to get water across to these people. And the thought struck a group of our friends that it's not a matter of non-availability as it is of suitability. So there was lots of water all around, but mostly contaminated. Now, one could, when you look at the bigger problem, you think, can I create water? Obviously, you can't create water. But what you can't create, you can certainly conserve. And you can conserve by a range of methods, one of them being how to you recycle and put it to reuse. So the focus of our company has been around research for the past several years, is to try and find solutions and feasible solutions, affordable solutions to clean water. And at the one end, at the extreme end, we're experimenting with various solutions in terms of cleaning seawater, which is 15,000 TDS all the way up to 25,000 TDS. And at the lower end, we started working on water such as 10,000 TDS and below, which is the brackish water. There are several solutions out there that you would have seen in terms of various filtrations and distillation and all sorts of things with the sweet water. But the trouble is with the brackish water. A group of scientists out of Punjab University worked on this, and I was lucky enough to have an interaction with these young boys, or young scientists. I no longer can call them boys. Our research facility located in Singapore has come up with solutions where we can now clean brackish water, and the cost of that cleaning a brackish water runs from anywhere between 10 pesos to 15 pesos per liter, as opposed to what you would normally get in about 60 pesos and above. Exactly how it works and the science of it is no longer a secret. It's a homegrown solution, and it works around hollow fibers and membranes and is intrinsically antimicrobial. So whatever happens with all of the other membranes is as you put in dirty water through it, a biofilm forms and renders the membrane over a period of time. It renders it, useless. In this case, these are solutions where not only does it not make it, it's intrinsically antimicrobial, but there are automated backwashes included in the solutions. And rather than stand here and sort of walk you through all sorts of technologies, we have a little stall at the end of in that little room where you can actually go and see how it happens. We've come up to a stage now where we've done all of the pilots and the patents and everything else. We're ready to go commercial, and we've been having a little conversation on the side with various banks to put out solutions out in the market where private sector can come in and saying, here's what I want to do. And you can put up these solutions anywhere from a household tap all the way to an overhead tank. And we are confident that, as this goes and it's a self-sustaining sort of arrangement over a period of time, we think that it will not be long before we can clean seawater. And the dream is to use that seawater for irrigating coastal lands, and that would be the real payback. That's about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Javed. Now I would like to request Ali Ansari. We've asked him to speak about role institutional water financing can play in boosting Pakistan water's economy, but I'm sure Ali has his own thoughts. So, Ali Ansari.
Thank you, Zohair, for having me here. Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. And I'd like to start by saying, I'm sure it's all been said in this conference that we are in the middle of a water crisis. It just builds up slowly, and it's always important to try and find the solutions before they overcome you. So the topic I was given was really very fast. You know, financing the water economy would have taken all the way looking at the crop values and the added value. So I thought, let's just focus on the water infrastructure just as well, I think, because many things are dovetailing with what people have said earlier today. And so I would like to look at identifying what we can actually do, right? And I'm looking at it particularly from my own experience and looking at it from how the private sector can interact for all the reasons, for instance, some reason Barbara has already pointed out. So if there's one political and corruption-ridden agenda in Pakistan, it is water. I totally agree with you. I don't want to elaborate, but it includes corruption, and on the other side, it also includes gross incompetence, right? I was once shouted down in Islamabad when I said similar things by retired WAPDA officials, but I'll say it again publicly at the risk that there may still be some in the audience here. So let's talk about where we need to invest in our water infrastructure. So obviously it's in the catchment, it's in the treatment, and it's in the distribution, so from getting the water from its source to the end consumer. So it was interesting, Adnan was speaking about the end consumer side. So Adnan, I 100 and 200% agree with you because I'm paying more than ₹1 myself as a residential consumer of water in Karachi. Okay, so it's becoming more and more acute, this crisis that we face, and there is massive underinvestment. And the road, like you want a solution, what is the road of solving these issues? We know if we rely on government, we are not going to get there, and we are not going to get there very, very fast. 10 years from now, we'll still be talking about it, right? So where do we stand today? So it's just a map of what our water infrastructure looks like. I won't go through all of it in detail. As the Hisar position paper has already said, replacing just the Indus Basin water infrastructure would cost more than $300 billion, right? So with any investment that we have, we know typically you'll spend 4 to 5% on the maintenance of an infrastructure. How much are we spending? Are we spending $15 billion per annum on just the Indus Basin water infrastructure? Okay, so the years of underinvestment are bound to show up and are already showing up in my house and industry and Karachi's water supply system because we're at the tail end. And talk about the farmers in Sindh, keep moving and you will see how this problem is becoming more and more acute over time. So the cost to the economy is huge. Right, so as an investment banker by training, what I immediately look at, so what are the areas that are required for investment? So we typically talk about dams, but actually it's much more than that. It's storage and rehabilitation, new water projects, water distribution infrastructure, hydropower generation, which is a separate issue, and water treatment and recycling. So if you look at it, think about it, in Pakistan, in each and every aspect of those, you spoke about one aspect, but water treatment, you know, the amount of water, I'll just tell you that we put in to our sea, which is untreated. All of these are becoming not just a water issue, but a sustainability issue for society overall. Picking those up one by one. So when we look at storage and rehabilitation, we are talking about things like, you know, the various extensions which are being to the dams to keep them going. We know the statistics in terms of the storage in Pakistan is extremely low compared to anywhere in the world, even compared to India right next door. So we need to improve storage. We have various programs already ongoing which work on these rehabilitation projects. and some which are in the works, which Ricard just spoke about, looking at things like Dasu Dam, which would improve our storage capacity and give improve the overall economy, the water economy. So, $10 billion can just go in the storage and rehabilitation of these projects. I'm just trying to give you, and these are very conservative numbers. So the first thing I can share with you, it is extremely hard to find the numbers with regards to this vital water sector in Pakistan, for all the reasons that you stated and others. Unfortunately, we have not organized ourselves to tackle the biggest problem that we face. What is the problem? What is the emergency? What will it cost to solve it? None of this information is readily available today. At least it's not available to me, and I have more access than most people. So it's a very genuine problem. Hydropower generation, there are some actually very good signs happening in Pakistan on hydropower generation. I will go through some of those things which have been on the drawing board. Some of them are actually starting to come through. And there are reasons why I believe this is happening. Because we tend to talk about water and we immediately talk about dams and dams which generate hydropower. This is typically how we think of the water solution. So interestingly, the private sector has recently come into this, and obviously I take on board what Ricard said earlier, that vast amount has been done in the public sector on a 20-year view, but obviously in those you had also seen even the fossil fuel ones were majority done in the public sector in the past. If you take a shorter view, you would see that the private sector involvement is growing for a whole host of reasons, to do with transparency, to do with government's capacity, to do with the ability to raise the tax and government creditworthiness. Many of those factors are actually coming in, and we have to be very realistic in terms of what our government is capable of delivering in terms of its capacity, governance, the ability to implement projects, to do it in time, on budget, and the ability to raise the money. I mean, all of these are very clear and present challenges. Okay. Water treatment and recycling. So if you look at it, hardly anybody has access to safe drinking water in Pakistan. What we consider the 36%, I mean, even that water is not really safe. Sayyid Javed was just speaking about some of the innovations that they are involved in trying to take this polluted water and make it drinkable. But quite clearly, there needs to be a dedicated focus, not just in terms of recycling the water for usage, but also for sustainability reasons that we need to do it. There is also, obviously, with 1,000 kilometers of coastline, quite a lot of potential to do desalination, but we need to realize it's extremely expensive when you're looking at people having it for free on the other hand, right? So the question of who pays also comes in. How do you pay for it? And I will touch on that a little bit further later on in my presentation. So water distribution infrastructure. So this is one of the core areas, and unlike hydropower generation, which has an income stream which is attached to it, there is a requirement for very major water distribution. So this is typically done in the public sector, but I think somebody mentioned the K4 stream project, right? It's been on the drawing board for years. The cost of it has gone up by several 100%, and if we leave it as it is 10 years from now, it would still not come in, and I think the cost of it may be in trillions, the scale at which it's going right now, okay? And in the meantime, Karachiites will be without water, right? To the extent that desalination is being looked at right now, which has, but people, as I said, the price I'm paying today, yes, I can afford it, but how many people can, right? So it's not feasible on a mass level for the citizens of Karachi. So we need to look at all of these. So as you can see, what I'm now coming at, the problem, I'm trying to describe the problem, and also I'm very happy panelists before me have spoken about the role of the public sector, so I don't have to dwell too much about the need for private sector involvement. So my paper today is really concentrating on how we can use PPP partnerships in trying to solve some of these issues. Now, I think this is very important because we can blame government, we can do other things, but we also have to look at some of the cold, hard facts. Who pays for water infrastructure? So if we look at in the world in general, and a lot of this is in the public sector, the water infrastructure, the consumers by and large pay for the O&M, so the running cost of the water, the replacement, that we are talking about, whether we're replacing capacities or whatever it is, the consumer charge that they pay for the usage of the water will typically pay for this. And when we look at it globally as a whole, the models are different in many countries. Governments quite often pick up the interest portion of that. Okay, so that's an implied subsidy in water that people get. Now let's look at Pakistan, which is the left, the first one. And so for me, it was fascinating that the consumer in Pakistan is actually paying a very small amount for the water infrastructure that we even have today. This is the biggest political issue. Who will pay if we need to invest these billions of dollars? Do we want the taxpayer to pay, or do we want the consumer to pay? We need to answer this question, okay? Without answering this question, someone else will pay is not the answer. The hydropower projects are very interesting because we use the power consumer to pay for the water infrastructure. So all of you here, I assume, have an electricity bill. You're owners of the Neelam Jhelum project. I don't know whether you knew that or not. Every month, the government makes a surcharge on your bill, which you pay, and you were supposed to be issued shares, and you finance this project. I will not say too much because, the powers that be have done this project, and these days one should not be critical of them in public. So a project which was supposed to cost a few $100 million now costs billions of dollars, right? And I will not go into what made it. I'm told it's technical difficulties which caused all these issues, okay? But the point is made that even the more organized people in our country, when they set out to do a project, could not do it. What better case can I make to you that there is definitely a need for private sector involvement who take the risk, who will say that if we do it at this price, we'll have to deliver or pay through equity, right? So that kind of penalty is not normally there for government. The price simply goes up, and they give us more of a surcharge, tax payment, something else, and so the consumer pays for that. So, but I do want to make the point, it's not just the government's fault. At some time, the Pakistani consumer will have to pay more. And whether that's the farmer, the urban, there has to be a better way of doing it. It can't be the slum dweller. It can't be the shanty towns are paying even more than I do for my water. There has to be a more fair and equitable way that we treat water as a molecule and we pay for it reasonably. We understand farmers will pay less, but there has to be a more reasonable way of doing it. And if people don't pay, we cannot build this infrastructure. That means the taxpayers are paying, and there's a limit to how much you can tax the people to pay, and the government's capacity is severely constrained. We know that in terms of debt to GDP, debt servicing. So the government cannot simply keep borrowing to build this infrastructure. I think it's just a fact of life for us to understand. Hence the PPP model that we do bring in the private sector to find the last mile solutions, to build the storage, to build this infrastructure, just firm in the knowledge that they will get paid. I think this has become a very important question for people investing in infrastructure projects, that there is an adequacy to pay, right? And we can bring those about. You mentioned certain guarantees and other things that can be brought in, but the system overall should generate the required revenues to support that infrastructure, fundamentally. So, so all of these billions of dollars which need to be invested, let us improve the revenue model. Let us try and bring the efficiency into these systems, that they are delivered on time and on budget, and reduce the investment burden on the government. So this is, I won't go too much into this, but if you look at it, on the left-hand side is what Adnan has already said. I met him after months, so we didn't collude on this slide or anything like that. This is what he wants from government. So he said, you know, the government should have an overall policy and project prioritization. We want to do these projects. And they should provide the right-of-way and land acquisition where required, right? Because it's not possible to do it by the private sector. The private sector can pay for it, but the actual right-of-way has to be procured by government. The government needs to pay capacity purchase guarantees that if certain capacities are being put up, and here I'm talking about pipelines, canals, barrage, whatever it is, so there has to be. They do it on an implied basis in dams. And then obviously, also they should provide regulatory approvals. The private sector can do everything on the right of that. Now, whether we do it in various mix, government can remain shareholder, stakeholder, many things can happen. But the left-hand side, the government has to do. Okay. Now, what is our learning from other sectors, and how can we apply it to solve this problem that we have in Pakistan? So, Pakistan is a pioneer, by the way, with the help of the World Bank in IPP model. And not many people know it, but HUPCO was the first IPP in Asia. And this package, which was developed with the help of the World Bank, then went on, and now practically all power in the rest of Asia comes through IPP mode. And in most of the world now, we are seeing that happen. So the government has played a very important role of providing a security package. But if we look at it, so that's the learning. When the government can come in and de-risk a project, the private sector capital can come in and fill the gap. I think that's basically what we're talking about. And that the government provides the packaging of it, and then we can slice various aspects, as Ricard was also saying, in terms of who provides what financing. And it can be a partnership. It doesn't have to be that it's all private, it's all public. It can be, and I'll show you an example of that in a minute. And as with anything, the first few projects always have to be incentivized, because this is part of the de-risking project. So I'll take you through one project I'm very familiar with. This is the Sindh Anglo Coal Mining Company. It's done by the same government of Sindh that you spoke about earlier. And so the prospect of the government of Sindh going and building $1 billion coal mine, even they themselves felt they wanted it done. And they felt that it was a priority project, and therefore they chose the PPP mode. We wrestled with this for quite some time, and there was no off-the-shelf solution as there is with IPPs, which we can build very quickly. There was a power offtake, but it was in a separate company, so how could we make all of this flow through? I won't go through the whole thing, but as I'm saying, many stakeholders, including government of Pakistan, government of Sindh, the Thar Coal Energy Board, which came about as a result of this, outside contractors, equity investors, a power generation company. So equity holders in which the government of Sindh is a majority shareholders. So lenders from around the world. So all of this shows you the complexity, and water is even more complex. Okay, so all I'm telling you is the solutions can be found. It requires that we come up with packages. Now, applying the IPP model, when it's a dam with water on it, no problem. We will simply rely as an integrated project on the revenue stream of selling the electricity, and the water comes free. Water storage, great, no problem. I'm actually now talking about when it comes beyond dam, right? Because I think the investment in those areas is vital, and unless we get this thing going, there will be no investment. I'm very sure of it, or it will be wasted investment, right? Investment which is over budget and is not delivered on time. So when we look at the IPP model and adapt it, we look at what the government does in that. Now, over time, the guarantees that government provide has come down, and probably in the next phase, the government guarantee will practically vanish, right? So when we look at the IPP model, what do we need to do? I believe the single most important task of the government, apart from having a water policy, which thanks to Hisar, at least they've been provided one, is to be able to prioritize projects and to package them. The role that it does in the PPIB today, I believe what we have a need for is something like a PWIB. So there's actually people sitting, thinking, and trying to package water projects. What is it? Is it barrages? Is it canals? Is it the Karachi stream projects? What is it, right? So when you have people sitting there and planning these projects, at least we will have someone in government looking how to do it in one window, and they will collect information and data also in putting this together. So I think that is vital. By trying to keep it one window, I believe that whatever capacity payments are done should also be made the responsibility of the same entity. So they're looking both not just at the projects that are coming, but how they get paid for, where the revenues will come from. So I'm really talking about a part of government which takes responsibility for the financing of the infrastructure, not just in handing out tenders. Then, unlike power plants, we need right of ways, which you said earlier. So in the Thar project, for instance, we needed to do massive land acquisition like you do in a dam, and the government of Sindh played its role. And because we came up with a proper structure, we were able to make sure the money got to the right people, right? So this is how we try and cut down on corruption. And other parts. Guarantees now are a very important part of this. I was going to stress on the need for guarantees beyond the government of Pakistan. You've already mentioned that, so I won't stress on it, but World Bank, Asian Development Bank have offered to top up Pakistani guarantees. And this is not just relevant for international investors, it's very relevant today in today's investment climate for domestic investors. So I genuinely believe that if there was a package on the table for domestic investors, we don't actually need to go and raise many dollars. We can mobilize domestic savings. We can mobilize domestic risk capital from the investors who are looking today to invest. And we can come up with homegrown solutions, create employment, and create very good growth in the economy and solve a very major long-term problem that we are facing. All we need to make sure is to provide the right security package, the right system whereby there is no corruption, right? And make sure that projects are delivered on time and on budget, or somebody else pays, not the government, not the taxpayer. So this is simply another graph on how something like this would work. I will not dwell on it. I don't think we have the time to do it, but how PPP mode company would exactly work. Anybody can refer to it later. So I was saying there's good news on hydropower project. So the private sector, because it can rely on that package, the same HUBCO package now adopted, so the security package is in place, it's financeable. So just based on that, now we are starting to see power generation of a fairly decent size come into the private sector. These are the largest PPPs. You have not heard of them as yet. Because they are carried out by China Three Gorges, the world's largest operator of dams. But I'm very happy to see this. I'm very happy because those dams are getting built and they're not going to be 10 times over budget. And if they are, they will pay, right? We will not pay. The government is still continuing to work on the multi-billion-dollar projects, right? The long gestation multi-billion-dollar project, but at some point in time when those projects are sufficiently de-risked, and some workable models have come forward, there is quite the possibility that they go into PPP mode. The government is still there, but we try and address the issue of on time and on budget by private sector involvement. So the SECMC, the Sindh Anglo Coal Mining Company, Zohair has just given me the clock, did exactly that. Okay, so that's why I'm concluding. So I genuinely believe the private sector should be involved in dedicated water projects, not just the dam projects. To bring management, financing, technical expertise, and the government to provide those 3-4 things on the left-hand side. When this is done, the pricing of water and the collection has to be done in sync. We don't want to end up with more circular debt, which we call actually the black holes, which requires a tariff regime. Formation of a security package on the likes of the IPPs, which my suggestion today is we form something like a PWIB, call it what you want to. Then we need to have dedicated water projects which are brought forward, where various stakeholders will become owners of these projects. Let's connect these water projects to domestic savings. We don't need to rely on dollar financings. Infrastructure bonds, I think, would be very, very popular in Pakistan with the right guarantees, top-up guarantees. And we can do it to rehabilitate our water infrastructure, increase our productivity, and have at least 12 billion of direct savings and countless tens of billions of indirect savings. That's what I propose to you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ali. You have very nicely set up for my next two main speakers, because the next two speakers represent the two institutions that we want to respond to some of the issues you've raised and highlighted. So to respond, the first part or part of it, I would now request Samar Hassan of State Bank of Pakistan. And we are hoping that State Bank will look at water financing and come up with some policy decisions in this regard. Samar.
Thank you. Thank you, Zuhair. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me thank Hisar Foundation in the first instance to invite me here for this conference. As a part of the keynote address, my speech was on 8 pages. But looking at the mood of the audience over here, 8 pages? Yeah, it was on 8 pages. But looking at the mood of the audience over here, except for 7, and I can count who were those 7. So I have decided to cut it down to 1.5 page. So I'll just be coming to the main points. But of course, I'll be touching 1 or 2 points that you mentioned over here. First, water. Its relevance with the central bank. Yes, it has a relevance with the central bank. Why? Because the water has a relevance with the agriculture sector. And the agriculture sector has a relevance to the central bank. We all know as to what is the role of agriculture sector in Pakistan's economy in terms of job creation, in terms of its contribution to the GDP, in terms of its contribution to the exports. I don't need to overemphasize that. Secondly, it has a relevance with the business. And especially in the business, when I talk about the business, then more than 90% of the businesses are SME sectors. So that is the second area of interest for the central bank. So we have got 4 priority sectors. I have touched upon agriculture and SME. The third one is construction, housing. Again, an area very close to the heart of the central bank, and the usage of water and its conservation in that. The fourth one is directly infrastructure itself. So among the 4 priority sectors that the central bank tries to take care of are agriculture, SME, housing, and infrastructure. And infrastructure has a direct relevance with whatever we are talking about, and I'll come to that in the latter part of my speech. And the final one, which has a relevance of water with the central bank, is that we want to promote a green finance in Pakistan. And for that, we have got the green banking guidelines, and water preservation is a key part of that. Now, what does exactly the central bank can do in these areas? So the role of the central bank is primarily threefold. The first one is, which is purely my domain, is create enabling regulatory environment so that the financial institutions could provide financing to these sectors that I mentioned. And that is exactly the reason that in the central bank we have got separate prudential regulations for these priority sectors, separate prudential regulations for the agriculture, separate for SMEs, housing, and then separate prudential regulation for infrastructure. And that, again, has a relevance with what has been said in some of the earlier discussions, and I'll come to that as to what role we are playing and what else could be played. The second, apart from the enabling regulatory environment, the second role of the central bank is the market development, capacity building of the lending institutions, and the risk-sharing mechanism, something that has been talked about over here. And the third role of the central bank, where actually we go beyond our domain in its true spirit, but that again is built in terms of our legislation, is basically the role of the direct interventions in the market. And I'll come to that, how is that related to the water. There were a couple of worries in my formal speech when I was looking at the numbers, and I'm sure that you must have been hearing about those numbers yesterday and this morning, but a couple of worries that I was looking at when I was looking at the numbers was, of course, in terms of deteriorating per capita availability of the water over a period of say, for example, 1996, 97, when it was something like 1,300 cubic meter per capita to 1,100 in 2006, and one study was saying that it will go down as to 700 cubic meter per capita by 2020. The study was also highlighting a factor which was pretty dangerous. It was showing that if the things go on the same tangent, then probably by 2030, Pakistan would be among the top 33 countries which would have extreme water stress. So that was something worrying. Now the point is as to what central bank is doing or what the central bank can do. So if we come into the, like for example, enabling regulatory environment. So for and some of the projects that I'll be talking about would not be those big numbers that have been shown earlier. Probably I'll be talking about some smaller numbers. For the bigger numbers, we have got infrastructure prudential regulations available. These prudential regulations provide the banks and the investors to have an incentive compared to a normal project, compared to the normal corporate sector. Say, for example, in a corporate sector, if someone wants to invest and set up a project, and the maximum exposure that the bank can take on a single project is 20%. We understand that for the infrastructure projects, that cannot serve the purpose because these are the larger projects. So we have relaxed that in terms of our prudential regulations from 20% to 25% per single party. There has been a group exposure limit as well, you see, for the corporate sector. Again, that was 25%, so that we again gave a cushion of additional 5% in that. So up to 30% if you want to set up an infrastructure project. This percentage is the percentage of the equity of the bank. So if there's a bigger project, then you probably can go up to 30% compared to 25% in the corporate sector, a group per group exposure. And if there are even much bigger projects, and if bank can take care of the risk, we can even consider, you see, that on a much lenient basis, on a case-to-case basis. The green banking guidelines, again, as earlier I mentioned, is the area where we have defined that how we can promote, you see, conservation of water in different area. For example, when we talk of the agriculture, then we understand that there are a number of initiatives that can be taken in case of agriculture to save water. And for those projects, we have actually reduced the repayment tenor, which is normally 5 years to 10 years. So again, a relaxation that has been provided from our side. Now I'll come to the specific intervention, and I think that would be a part of interest for the audience over here, especially those who are interested in setting up that, because I believe that most of these would be unknown to you. And a lot of blame I bear that, you see, because it's my responsibility and the responsibility of the bank. Osmani Sahab, sorry, with apologies. It is also the responsibility of the financial institutions, the banks, to inform the investors that these facilities are available. And the facilities that now I'm talking about are those where even the liquidity is not being deployed by the bank themselves. It's not the bank liquidity. These are the areas and the initiatives and the schemes where the liquidity is provided by the central banks. That's pretty unusual, you see. Normally, it does not happen across the world for the central banks to provide themselves the liquidity. But I'm talking of some of the refinance schemes which are available, where we provide the liquidity, bank actually on-lend it to the end users, and there's sufficient cushion available, and I'll talk about that, what cushion is available. But of course, the risk is being taken by the financial institutions, the banks. The first one is, if you talk on a business level, if someone wants to set up a water treatment plant anywhere, and there might be two solutions. One, it could be an export-based project, and could be a non-export, any general business. So for export, you see, based project, if the cost comes to something like over even 2 billion rupees, the facility is available under State Bank of Pakistan's long-term refinance facility. This facility is called LTFF, Long-Term Financing Facility. This facility is for 10 years with an initial grace period. The interesting part of this facility is that the end user rate for this facility is 6%, and that's a fixed rate. So you can imagine that funding, you can compare with the current rate available, and you can also compare it with the liquidity that normally the banks, because when you talk of the long-term liquidity, that's one of the key issues in the infrastructure projects, that's not there. So this is the long-term liquidity which is being provided by the central bank. So it is primarily for setting up export-based projects, and a water treatment plant is eligible under that facility. But if you are not an exporter, you're a normal entity, business entity, and you don't have an export performance, so still you can avail a facility which is basically setting up an SME in Pakistan. As I already mentioned, that out of almost 5 million businesses in Pakistan, more than 90% are SMEs. And I can tell you that except for very few people here, most of the people, because when we define what is an SME, then the maximum turnover of that entity should not go beyond 800 million rupees in a year. So almost, you see, except for the top clients, most of the entities are covered over there. So if you're an SME, you can avail this facility for this water treatment plant. The rate, again, is 6%. Facilities available for 10 years. And the bank have a sufficient cushion of spread of 4% available with them. So we provided only 2%, and user rate is 6%. Now, there is another facility that if you want to operate this water treatment plant, you need energy. So there is a facility which is not only for this particular, you see, water treatment plant, for any project in Pakistan. And even that facility is available for individuals. I mean, you can go and, you see, install a solar system solution on your rooftop. That is available to the individual as well. So right starting from the individual to the corporate clients, this facility is available, where for renewable energy projects, up to 50 megawatt, these are not the smaller numbers, up to 50 megawatt, you can avail a refinance through the banks from the central bank, where again the liquidity is being provided at 2% to the banks, with the margin of 4% available with them, so the end user rate is 6%. And this facility is for 10 years again. And for the larger projects, there are 3 different categories. I'll not get into the details of those, but the bigger one, up to 50 megawatt, there is a grace period of 2 years with maximum tenure of 12 years, so including of that. But of course, there's a cap on the financing of it. The maximum financing that can be provided to a single project is 6 billion. So now what can happen is that these two could be clubbed together. So for a water treatment plant, you can have that facility for that machinery, and for energy, you can again have that, you see. Even if you want to set up hydro projects for power generation, this refinance facility is available, renewable energy facility on the same terms and condition. We were in Peshawar. Mahmood Sahib, you would recall that there was a presentation there where the solar tube well were required, you see. They were being asked because there was barren land, and that is an issue in Balochistan especially. For that, if someone wants to set up a solar tube well anywhere in Pakistan, So for that, whatever solar needs, you see, for power generation needs, this facility is again available over there. They can use this facility, which the end user rate is 6%. Similarly, we talked about the desalination plants here. The plants are big. They are not covered anywhere in any facility, but the power used for running that desalination plant, if the power is generated through renewable energy. So, oh yeah, I'm just finishing. You see, for power generation, and if that is on the renewable energy basis, that again is available at 6% end user rate. Another news is that for agriculture sector, we talked about this water, for high efficiency irrigation mechanism, for that plant and machinery, we are actually in the process of designing a facility, which again would be a refinance facility where the liquidity would be provided from us. We are in a pretty advanced stage of that. That would also help in water. Finally, you see just one comment on yours, you see suggestion, yes, absolutely, that's correct. We even can raise that liquidity here locally because that liquidity domestically is available. And who could be the best institutions? Islamic banks. Ideally, because they have got liquidity available, and ideally all these bigger infrastructure projects, when financed by Islamic banks, they make the ideal marriage, you see, between financing and that. And one could always think of water sukuk as well. So with that, thank you, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Samar. With that, I will now like to introduce our featured speaker, Mr. Arif Usmani. Arif is running a bit late. He has other people waiting for him. So I hope you are able to answer our requests as well. What is National Bank going to do for the water sector?
Thank you, Zuhair. I think when Zuhair realized that I had not brought a presentation, he promoted me to chairman because I am supposed to summarize everybody else's. He says, you don't have a presentation, you're promoted. So in a way, I'm blessed. Thank you very much for inviting me. This is an amazing subject. I was talking to one of my friends before coming here and I said, why are you going to this water conference? So just after I came to National Bank in early March, I was in Faisalabad at a rice exporters conference. And we were talking to a lot of our clients, and I discovered that a kilogram of basmati rice consumes 3,000 liters of water. And I was just appalled at the relationship between, and they wanted to grow rice exports to 5 billion, 2 billion, and we said, water, pani to hai nahi. How are you going to do this? So water became a key subject, and I'm blessed to be a friend of Simi's for 40 years, Simi. It's been that old. And Simi's had a passionate interest in water for a long time, and now I realize, coming back to Pakistan, how critical this is going to be. So one of the jobs Zuhair, you had assigned me was to summarize what everybody said. I think it's not required because we don't have time, but I noticed the complex financing structure that was presented by you. And then Adnan, your point about end-user financing and the arbitrage available, if we can get things going from 5-7 paisas to 70-80 paisas for the end user. Somebody has to pay for it, and I also used Google to learn about water before I came here. That the three people that Ali you mentioned that pay for it are direct users, end users, government or taxpayers, and ultimately aid and viability gap funders like infrastructure, multilaterals. So they're really, and banks who come in also. And I think, Barbara, you touched on our favorite topic, the favorite topic of the country, the Prime Minister and everybody, about corruption. So the less said, the better about that, because everybody is very familiar with this subject in Pakistan. Is center of plate for us. And I think one of the points I picked up from your presentation was diversity in decision-making. Although decision-making in my house is pretty not diversified, but it's very women-centric. But that works also. And Javed and I already did a deal before we came in, right? Javed's every water project for clean water from Brackish already has an associated financier attached to it, Javed. And that's National Bank. We'll go together and sell this using Samar's brilliant schemes of various kinds of subsidies. One of the amazing things about our central bank, and I'm a very poor substitute for Dr. Raza Bakar, who would have done a much better job of summarizing all of this. But summer, and we were in Peshawar, and Dr. Raza, who was chairman of this conference, said, you know, he's an IMF guy, and he said, what kind of central bank is this? We are looking into agriculture, water, and what kind of central bank? So this is not a typical central bank. This is an amazingly supporting anchor for all of us. And I find Samar an amazing partner in developing all of this. We also get criticized by him for not meeting various targets. I've told him not only am I going to meet your targets, I'm going to blow through them. And you're going to have to grow your available financing next year. And this is my first 6 months at National Bank. I barely know my way to the toilet there. It's a very complex organization, but soon I'm going to get to grips with it, and hopefully we'll use all your facilities and deliver on it. And I think, Ali, your presentation was simply something that I want you to present to various banks, and all of us would benefit from that kind of experience or experience with the Sindh Coal Board. And in the end, I just want to say two things about National Bank, because we don't have time. I have 35 Chinese entrepreneurs in my office in 30 minutes. They're visiting from China, and we're hosting them. So I'll have to disappear. But National Bank created a separate business group. We pulled out all the priority sectors that Samar talked about, and we created a business group in the bank called Inclusive Development Group. We have the corporate banking group, we have the commercial banking group, we have a retail banking group, and now we have a fourth group which stands on its own feet and looks very small. And my purpose of creating the separate group in National Bank called the Inclusive Development Group, inspired by Professor Atif Mia's use of the word inclusive and other people's word, is basically to embarrass these people into saying how small they are as a business group. And we have staffed them, we've gone out to universities to partner with academics to try to interest them in come to the bank. We're going to advertise very shortly for people who are interested in this subject to apply to National Bank. We're going to staff it. We're going to get 300 or 400 or 500 of these agricultural field officers, and we have only 170 left. So there's a lot of activity at National Bank. If people of like-minded interests are here, National Bank we are trying to put the word national back into National Bank. I keep saying to my team, I don't want to be a larger version of UBL or MCB anymore. If they want to chase a letter of credit for a private corporation, they're welcome to it. I'm not going to be there. That business is there. But my business is to put the word national, underline it, and do all the right things for the priority sectors and for the government, where we want to make a difference. And I think that will be the role of National Bank. And with that, I have to end at 4 o'clock because I have another appointment. Thank you very much. I'm happy to moderate questions for another 5-7 minutes, or you can do it. Questions from the audience and comments from Simi. Why don't you come here? Yeah.
Thank you so much. So when you say that you have got this fourth small window and new operation going for inclusivity.
Yeah, we've got it staffed at about 400-500 people have expressed moved in, and yeah.
2 questions from you. First, are you thinking about converting National Bank into a National Development Bank? Is that the
my
purpose?
owner is on my extreme left. 75% I'm owned by the State Bank anyway.
Okay, so
no, I can't convert nothing, but I can do what the name is only a name. We will do, you see, the 4 segments literally within our IDG business, the inclusive development business, is agriculture, sustainable development was one, and water. I'm so interested now in water, I might even separate it into a separate division. And there's women's entrepreneur funding and SMEs and housing, low-cost housing. These were the 4 sectors before I came, and now there's going to be water. There's so much happening here that I think we should. Yeah, National Bank will.
So that was my second question you already answered. I wanted to know what you were going to do in water.
Water, we'll create a separate water division.
Yes. So
Agri is a division, but we were doing water under Agri. Now we should do water separately because it's got industry applications, got
okay, great.
Other than agriculture apps.
So that's music to my ears.
Yeah, we will do it. But we don't know how to do it. You have to help us do it.
Well, we are here to tell you how to do it. That's how we build synergies.
Yes.
So I look forward to seeing you again very soon on that. May I ask a question from you, Samar Sahib? When I asked him the question and he threw the ball to you. So what about a national development bank in Pakistan? And as he said, not a bigger version of MCB or HBL, but a very different kind of bank.
Yes.
What is State Bank thinking about that? Why can't National Bank be that bank?
Yeah. Actually, you see, I think you raise a very, very valid point, because as I mentioned that this is basically not the business of the central banks. Normally, it's not the business of the central bank to get into actually, you see, providing finance for the development. For those purposes, actually, there has to be the development finance banks. Yeah. Unfortunately, we have had those institutions in the past. If you look at some of the key institutions, like we have had NDFC, we have had the Bankers Equity, and some of the very good, and if you look at IDB, most of the industrialization that took place was in that period, if you look at that. What has happened, and even during that period, what has happened is that these institutions used to structure, you see, the transaction, and the commercial banks, they just used to come, make a consortium and provide the financing, because they did not have those expertise. So, but what has happened over a period of time is that all of these institutions vanish, you see, in one other way. So now...
Why did they fail?
Yeah. So there is a need to have the development financial institutions, but we'll have to look at by having, you see, the experience of what has happened to those institutions.
Okay.
How will the audience ask? Is there a mic? वहाँ पे है. This is even longer than Samar's speech.
Arif, why don't you come here and then you can turn around and
Answer to question number 2, yes, KWSB has the water rights to distribute.
So let me answer that one, because I think I've proposed it. So the answer is no, we are not proposing. As I said, what we don't want is another one. When there's a problem, it is always very convenient to blame somebody else, right? So if you look at a power problem that we have, it is very generic in nature, which is that we collect less than what we pay. In water, we don't even know right now if there's what level of collection there is in terms of revenue. So more than ₹1 trillion is collected in terms of revenue from power sector. And obviously we can blame IPPs for only the capacity purchase price, because that's what the government pays them. The biggest problem in Pakistan has been related to fuel mix issue, which has been publicly acknowledged that we ran plants on furnace oil. We did not have enough renewable energy. So when we look at the rate of return of the private sector, it is a very small proportion of anything that magnitude that you could blame on them. It is transmission and distribution, which is still in the public sector. It is the bill collection, which is still in the public sector. So no, we are not. We are saying, what we are actually saying is, we want to avoid all of those issues, going a couple of steps further, learning the lessons, and saying we want to, for instance, not have dollar returns, right? Those are some of the answers.
We just have time for one more question, because the next session is also ready to be filled. Yeah, please.
Third last question is about this long-term financing facility, LTF. Sufficient question is available. Yes, as of right now, as of today, for 1 month, there is a cushion of more than 25 billion available right now, you see, with the banks. But the upper cap, which has been mentioned over $100 billion, upper cap for those projects is only 2.5 billion rupees. We must keep in mind that central bank cannot be in the business of providing liquidity for larger projects for a longer time.
Okay, with that, we come to the close of this session. I would like to thank Samar Hassan from State Bank, Ricard from the World Bank, Ali Ansari, Barbara Schreiner, Adnan Aslam, and Sayyid Javed. And as a token of appreciation, we have plaques for you, which will be handed over to you.